Well, first of all, thanks a lot for joining me. I really appreciate
No problem.
you taking
Oh,
the
my
time.
pleasure.
I know you've got a lot to navigate around being on tour, and what a heavy tour it is, too. Let's set your Epicurean context first. You worked in the food industry. For how long and where did you work?
I was a fanatic in my own home for many years. The origin story is not does not reflect well on me, but I was just sick of my mother's tomato and cheese sandwiches. The tomato would soak through the sandwich, the bread, and they were soggy sandwiches. And my buddies, most of them had mothers who didn't work in the 80s, and it felt like their mom's full-time jobs were feeding their sons and making their lunches. So I'm looking at all kinds of fabulous, like 6 different courses of lunches. And so I insulted my mother's sandwiches. I told my mother, your sandwiches taste like shit. And she did not take kindly to that. You didn't speak that way in the Hassan house, or at least I didn't, and my mother didn't. And so she was like, okay, you make your own sandwiches from now on. So I'm like 13, trying to figure out, okay, what else is there besides peanut butter? How do I do this? And so slowly, she was like, you make your own. I'm not helping you ever again. And she held a grudge. That woman could hold a grudge. And so it came with sandwiches and then chili and pasta and all kinds of other things. And so that's the origins of the journey. And then I was like, man, this is the one thing I'm good at. I seem to have a good palate. I go into friends' homes and they go, oh, man, I'm sorry, I have nothing to eat. And I'd be like, do you mind if I take a look? They'd be like, oh, of course, but you're not going to find anything. And next thing you know, we have some kind of like, pasta and kind of like crepes I've made. And they're like, where did you find green onions? Where did you find the batter for these crepes? Where did you find? And I'm like, no, it was here, it was here. And so I had this knack for like finding things in people's cupboards and fridges and making something out of nothing.
So, did your mom, just circling back to your mom, did she ever speak to you again after you're developing gourmet Dagwood sandwiches at home? And
You know, it was always a struggle. My mother, I don't know. I guess it's like a lot of immigrant mothers. We would get into arguments about certain things. Like I'm trying to explore food. I'm watching Jacques Pepin on PBS on the weekends. I'm subscribing to these food magazines. And I would make like this farfalle, a bow tie pasta with tuna. And then my mother would be like, oh, you don't put tuna on pasta. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? In all your travels to Italy, Mom, you went from Montreal Dorval Airport to King Abdulaziz Airport in Saudi Arabia on Alitalia once. Okay, that's your whole. You've never even been to Little Italy. You don't know anything about Italian food. Sometimes your mother can say something that can really light a fuse under you in a very special way. So my mother and I had this struggle back and forth of like, they're very sort of, you know, they seem to be open-minded on the surface, like so many people. And then, when presented with an avocado or kale, all of a sudden it was like, oh, I know this is no good. I don't like
stand
this. So
back.
it was a lot of back and forth and a lot of, battling with a guy who was truly open-minded about food. And this is part of what I joke about too, Tony, this idea that we all think, this is one of the incredible things about food. Many of us will say we're very open-minded. We're very tolerant, not just to food, but different people and places and ideas. And then one of your buddies puts ketchup on his scrambled eggs and you're like, okay, that friendship's over. I can't.
You have to
I
draw
can't
the line somewhere.
Yeah, right. That's the beautiful thing about food. So inclusive and so hilariously divisive at the same time.
I'm going to touch on maybe how you reconcile. You grew up a Muslim. How you reconcile that with? I was reading your book, "Is There Bacon in Heaven?" your memoir, and you being asked to be a judge for Ribfest in Toronto, and it's kind of serendipitous because I actually walked through that festival inadvertently in Toronto, and we were just a tourist traveling around, and I have lots of friends who live in Toronto, so we were traveling, walking through the parks. We ran into this sort of garish kind of
Yeah.
like a billion different kinds of ribs and beer. So how do you reconcile your faith, quote unquote, with with sort of your penchant and love for the Epicurean
I
experience?
know. It's very hilarious you happened upon it because how do you reconcile your walk in nature with this like carnival atmosphere and the whole, it was for me, I joked that it was like the pinnacle. I have arrived, right? I've been accepted as a judge at Ribfest, but I had, since I was a teenager, been flirting with pork. I was really like, I want to try this, and if you're reading the book, the reason I entitled it that is because I couldn't understand, I'm not supposed to eat bacon. Can't eat pork. Fine. White friends are eating it. Our Nigerian neighbors are eating it. Vietnamese guy across the street is eating it. All these friends are eating it, and they're eating it like it's a gift directly from God. That's how excited they are when it's like Sunday. My mom's making bacon. My mom's making bacon. And part of me is like, well, isn't there only one God? What's going on here? Why am I been singled out for this? And as a glutton and as a lover of food, my thing was also like, I have to try this at some point, right? Or, am I going to be rewarded in heaven? Is that what I get? You die, and then there's just a lot of bacon for you to finally try because you had made this, what seems like the ultimate sacrifice of not eating bacon your entire life. So, the Rib Fest thing was, I didn't eat pork often, but when I did, it was I wouldn't have a ham sandwich, for example. That felt too pedestrian.
Yeah.
But, in Mexico at the buffet at a resort, I'm taking the chorizo, I'm taking the bacon, I'm taking this other, pork stew. I'm in Mexico. It's made differently. It's exciting flavors, and I felt like Rib Fest was like that, So it was a bit of the what is that beer's name? I don't drink often, but when I do, it's
the Dos Equis. Yeah.
Most interesting man in the world. I was like, I got the most interesting man in the world vibe when it comes to pork. I don't eat pork often, but when I do, it's at Ribfest.
For a moment, you became the Indiana Jones of Ribfest. You just tore it up. I'm going to ask you, because you are, I think, a quintessential Renaissance character. Where do you feel most at home, or where's your happy place? Because you act, you've been on numerous television shows, you do a stand-up show, you're at home in the kitchen, obviously, and you sit behind a mic too, in the context of, well, being a radio host. Where's your happy place?
Well, at the risk of sounding like an opportunist or corny at worst, I feel like nothing beats stand-up comedy. I'm really geared towards instant gratification. I mean, I learned that at a young age. When I was an IT consultant, I remember I would be like, but is the client using this thing that we worked on for 4 months? Are they going to even use it? And most of my colleagues, by and large, they could be like, who cares? We got paid. And I was like, that's not enough. 4 months of my life went into this, making this, customized app for these people that I barely understood, that I lost sleep over, that I struggled to create or help create. Are they even using it? So I love instant gratification. It's part of the reason I love food. Food, there's a slight delay. Sometimes you're in the kitchen, you have to wait till all the plates come back to see if people, enjoyed your food or not. But instant gratification on stage is right there. You're hard pressed to find a place where you get such immediate feedback, good or bad.
And it's palpable, and there's a real risk in jumping out there every night. So how do you approach your show? Is it mostly improvised or mostly scripted? Historically, do you work with what you got, kind of thing?
It's a mix of a lot of things. So sometimes, and I remember talking to Colin Mockery about this once, Colin Mockery, famous improviser, one of the world's best. Whose line is it anyway? Mm-hmm. And I was saying, how do you prepare for your shows? And he goes, I eat a ham sandwich. And I go, no. What I mean is, Colin, you're backstage, the show's starting in 15, 20 minutes. How do you prepare? What do you do to prepare? He said, yeah, I understood your question. I eat a ham sandwich. I said, how does that make you prepare? He goes, because you want to do the most banal thing imaginable. You want to clear your mind, get all the stress out. And so sometimes, and I immediately realized what he was talking about, because there have been times where I'm vacuuming or lawn mowing or just cleaning out our garage or something. And some joke just kind of, I mean, there's no better way to say it than appears out of nowhere. It just appears out of nowhere. And I go, oh, that is almost a fully formed joke. And now I'm excited to get out on stage. Other times you're thinking and crafting, and it takes 3 years to finally be like, that's how I make the joke fun. Some conversation with somebody is the missing piece. And then other times you're like, I have a kernel of an idea. Let me get on stage. And the pressure of being on stage in front of people might help me figure this out. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I'm also a very honest person with the audience. And sometimes I have to be like, you know what? I thought I had something there. You're right. I don't. I just tell them, like, you help me realize I got nothing, but I thought it was something. So it runs the gamut, and which is kind of what excites me about stand-up. I have friends who sit and write at home and come to stage with almost a fully formed product, and it's incredible. Like you didn't bounce it off of somebody, you didn't really know if this was going to work, and here it is. And other people, my buddy Dave Merhej comes to mind, would work out like 90% of what he has on stage. He works it out on stage. And I think I'm in the middle. I have a lot of different ways of doing, getting to like what's really funny. For example, this show that I do, Does This Taste Funny? A solo show is 90 minutes. And with the exception of, the Dave Chappelles of the world, you're hard pressed to find anyone who's going to give you 90 minutes on stage. I've been lucky enough to get 45, 60. I was on the Just for Laughs in Toronto. I got a show of my own. Mm-hmm. So I did 45 minutes of this 90-minute show. And I was like, okay, great. I have this. And the rest is just stories that I think these are funny. I think I can tag these on to this. I think I can fit these into here. And sometimes you learn on stage that it's not quite the reaction you wanted. And other times you're like, it's exactly as entertaining as I hoped it would be. So, yeah, it's a real mix of approaches.
Well, thank you for bringing your brilliant melange of food and funny to Alberta for 3 shows. That's excellent. And what a test of your stamina. Good for you for doing that. And we are thankful to have you dropping into our province with your latest stand-up. Does this taste funny? Just to go out of our chat, Ellie, we have a huge record library, literally millions of cuts. Can I play a request for you?
Oh, man, any song, huh? Let me see. What am I... When somebody says something like that, I go back to my roots. Mm-hmm. And my roots are, they're almost bipolar. I was really into metal, Iron Maiden, but I also really loved Van Halen, sort of more like a little glam rock, But I loved Maiden. And then I also really loved hip hop in the 80s and 90s. And so Public Enemy and KRS-One, probably one of the greatest rappers I've ever had the pleasure and privilege to see live and listen to. So if you played something like, Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, or if you played Sound of the Police by KRS-One, either one hits me in this place. Cause I was under attack. My friends who were metalheads were like, you can't like rap. And my friends who were like into rap, they were like, what is this Maiden t-shirt? So Maiden had this mascot or whatever you want to call it, Eddie, and they'd be like, what the hell are you wearing? So I was really living these two worlds. And then Anthrax and Public Enemy did this collaboration together, but it was amazing. And it was 2 bands I loved, and I was like, you see guys, you've been taking a dump on me for years, and you can see that metal and rap get along perfectly fine. What are we fighting about here? Public Enemy #1. Anyway, anything you want to play out of any of the stuff that I've mentioned will make me very happy.